Welcome to the broadcast. This is Brother Eric John Phelps today on this beautiful Thursday, August the 3rd, 2023. And I have with me our most illustrious guest and wonderful researcher, Brother George Widger. Brother George, welcome to the broadcast today.
Well, thank you, Brother Eric. As always, it's a pleasure to be on with you.
It's good to have you too, yes. All right, well, the listeners always love to hear from you, and so do I. So what do you have for us today?
Well, my scripture verse is something I've shared before. However, I'm taking a different tact on it. It's Matthew 16, verse 18, Matthew 1:6, verse 1:8. And Simon Peter answered and said, verse 18. And I say unto thee, thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Okay, I actually spoke about this verse a couple weeks ago. Or as I said, I just like to approach it from a different angle, so to speak, which is just over 10 years ago, back in, I guess, March, April 2013, Jorge Mario Bergoglio became the current pope. He took the name Francis. And according to the Catholic Church, he's the 266th pope and allegedly the 266th successor to Simon Peter. Now, as I said, this is simply according to the Catholic Church. This has nothing to do with history or reality.
It has nothing to do with reality. Okay, yeah, okay.
Okay, so if you're just going to play in their playground for a moment, so they after Bergoglio became Francis, he said, "Well, why did you choose that name?" Well, he told a reporter saying, "Well, I've always been enamored with Francis of Assisi." Now that struck me as odd, even back then, because why would he take the name of the founder of a rival religious order?
Right. Franciscans were some of the real killers in the Croatian Ustashi in World War II. Yeah, they called him Satan, who was the head of Jasenovac concentration camp. You can read about it in a book titled Yugoslav, Auschwitz, and the Vatican. But the Franciscans ran that, and also the Ustashi, and a very, very horrible operation. But go ahead.
Okay, so when the Jesuits were established or reestablished in the 16th century, I'm not going to get into a whole discussion as to whether they're actually the Knights Templar or some other order. The other existing orders didn't take too kindly to it. They basically saw them as a rival gang. This is especially true among the Dominicans.
That's right. Because the Dominicans had the Inquisition. The Dominicans ran the Inquisition, and the Jesuits rivaled their power over the Inquisition when the Jesuits revived the Roman Inquisition in 1542, 2 years after their formal entrance into being protected by the Pope.
Now, so you could see them as like, well, I see these different orders as essentially rival gangs: Bloods, Crips, MS-13. They may have slightly different backgrounds, but they, well, okay, I realize this is just an analogy, but there may be some legitimate ill feelings between them. Maybe it's rivalry, maybe it's envy or jealousy. Who knows? But
well, remember, George, the Jesuits killed the Dominicans in the French Revolution. Many, many Dominican priests were killed. So because the Jesuits were punishing them for taking the Inquisition from them when the Jesuits were suppressed by the Pope. So they went after the Dominicans, and the Dominicans are deathly afraid of them. And the Dominican general kisses the ring of the Jesuit superior general. So, yeah, they don't mess with the Jesuit order.
So how long has it been? I should know this, but how long has it been the case that a Jesuit is a confessor to the Pope?
Well, many years. Nino Labello talks about it in his book, The Vatican Empire, that it's always a Jesuit who is a confessor to the Pope. And I'm not sure when that started, but I'm sure it's been around for a couple hundred years.
Well,
I would say at least from Vatican I, when the Jesuits controlling Vatican I had the Pope declared to be infallible when he would speak ex cathedra, centralizing all power in the hands of the Pope, and then the Jesuit general would control the Pope. So I would venture to say from no later than 1870 that a Jesuit has always had to be the confessor of the Pope.
Okay, so you're talking for at least 150 years or so.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so well, I realize that we're going far afield here, but I've spoken to Catholics over the years about the whole concept of papal infallibility, and this is usually lay Catholics. And they said, "Oh, that only applies to matters of faith and morals," and he's only exercised that privilege a handful of times, such as in 1950, so roughly 73 years ago, when he declared that Mary, I guess it was Pius XII, declared that Mary was bodily assumed into heaven, and about a century before that, where it was declared that she was immaculately conceived. And they say it's only been on limited occasions. So, and what Catholics will do is they'll differentiate between papal infallibility and papal impeccability. They say, oh, the Pope, the man in this situation, Francis, may be sinful, but when he speaks ex cathedra, i.e. from the chair of St. Peter's, he is infallible.
Yeah, that's the doctrine. That's the doctrine of infallibility. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that means when it comes to, say, political issues or whatever, or social issues, he's not infallible. That's according to Catholics.
Yeah, if he's not speaking ex cathedra, then he's not speaking infallibly. But I will tell you that Pius IX told some young men, the words I speak are the words of God. And I have that quoted in my book, Vatican Assassins. So they can go through that exchange, but whenever the Pope speaks, he is listened to, and when he's speaking to the people in general, they regard his words as the words of God, whether he's speaking infallibly or not. When he's speaking from the Vatican to the crowd out there in quote unquote St. Peter's Square, they think it's all the words of God. Okay.
All right. So was Simon Peter, when he denied the Lord 3 times, was he being infallible then?
Well, George, you know that Simon Peter had nothing to do with the Pope, the papacy, or any of that. You know, the Franciscans discovered his grave in Jerusalem in 1953. But Peter never went to Rome. And so the Peter of the Bible is not the Saint Peter of Catholicism. Okay.
Yes, I understand.
Okay.
Now I realize that we had a gap of something like 3 or 4 months where we're not doing streams because of various issues, technical or otherwise. And one of the things that happened during the break is several financial institutions, particularly here in the U.S., have failed. We already talked about Silicon Valley Bank and how the Jesuits ran that. And another institution that founded was Silvergate. That was established in 1988, and it was based out of San Diego, California. And that went under, I guess, in April of this year. And if you look at
what was the name of that bank again, George?
Silvergate, as in like silver bells, except for Silvergate.
See.
Now, you may be wondering, who ran that bank? Well, funny you should ask. I decided to look at the board of directors, and 2 of the prominent members of it were a fellow by the name of Paul Colucci.
He was an Italian Catholic.
How'd you know?
I just guessed.
Okay. Yes. So Mr. Colucci got his undergrad degree from University of San Diego, which is not technically speaking Jesuit, but is Catholic. And another member of the board of directors for Silvergate is a fellow by the name of Thomas Dirks, Dirckes. He got his undergrad and MBA from Fordham University.
Okay, so you have a Jesuit from Fordham that's on Silvergate Bank. You got another Jesuit coadjutor from University of San Diego, which is a Catholic school. So that's enough to run the bank.
Yes. So, gee, these, now, as I said before, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I repeat, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm a bad luck theorist.
Okay, George. All righty.
Well,
don't say the word conspiracy, but that means you're a kook. The CIA tells us that. Okay. Any of these conspiracy theorists, they're all a bunch of kooks.
Well, amen. But well, I suppose Noah, when he got his instructions to build an ark, he probably would have been labeled the first conspiracy theorist.
Well, of course, that was a conspiracy that there was going to be a huge flood. Never happened before. I bet that's what they call him. George, Noah, you're a conspiracy theorist. Come on. Let's eat, drink, and be merry.
Well, amen. So it's just funny that you have these people who are trained by the Jesuits who are running Silvergate, who are running Silicon Valley. You have the architects
Watergate. Of the Watergate, they're running that one too. Okay,
yes. So the architects of the stock market crash of 1929 were all Catholics, nice and old, like Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., John Jacob Rascombe, Nicholas Brady. So you're talking about there's something like 5 or 6 high-level Knights of Malta who are involved with that. I know you've discussed.
You got Tom Bragg, Ben Strong, and Joe Kennedy. Those are the 3 short sellers, according to Curtis Dahl in his book, FDR, My Manipulated Father-in-Law. And they were all Irish Catholics.
And Knights of Malta.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now I don't know about this Dirks or Carlucci. If they're knights, there's a good chance they are. But I thought the Jesuits trained people to succeed, not to fail.
Maybe it wasn't a failure, George. Maybe this is a move in their chessboard. They'll sacrifice a pawn to gain a bishop or a queen. So maybe this is their game.
Or they'll sacrifice several pawns.
Sure. Of course.
Okay, so what do they say? In order to make a brain omelet, you have to crack a few skulls.
I guess so. That's a very renowned statement there, George.
Okay, so that means things have stabilized over the last few months, but you have this panic in people's minds that, gee, maybe my money's not safe in these financial institutions. Maybe I should take it out. Maybe I should put it on my mattress or whatever. So what that does is that put fears in people's mind. Gee, this sounds somewhat like 1929 or early 1930s. So maybe the federal government should step in and save the day.
Well, doesn't it save the day whenever it steps in, George? Aren't things better off when the government steps in and applies its remedy to whatever the problem is? Huh? The answer's with government, George. Come on now. Bunch of good people, they mean well. There's no conspiracy. All right, they're there to save the day. They're there to save us, George, and help us. They're only out there to help us, George. Come on.
Well, that's interesting. So, in your humble opinion, or perhaps not so humble opinion, what do you think the end game what do you think the end game is with all these banks being destroyed?
I just think it's centralization of banking. So they are gradually centralizing them all under, who knows, Fed Now or something like that. But it's a gradual centralization of banking. If you watch this for the last 30 years, the number of banks have greatly decreased and they've been merged or bought out or whatever, and we have the centralization of banking. Yep.
Okay, and so there's been a big emphasis over the last several years to switch to digital currency, because we're told, people have been sold on this idea, oh, it's safe. You know, you'll be able to,
Yes, it's safe, George. Digital currency is safe. That's what we all need to have all of our funds in, and we'll be safe because the government is protecting our money, George. Forget gold and silver. That's for savages that think they have rights and individuality and national sovereignty. No. We all need digital currency so we can all be part of the one world commercial system, because we're all in this together, George. Okay?
yeah, boy, that terminology sounds vaguely familiar.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. That's what we hear every day from the Jesuit Socialist Communist Press.
Yeah. Well, you remember way back in 2020, we were told that no, well, you shouldn't use cash or coins because that's dirty. You know, you should use your debit or credit card or something like that because that's intrinsically cleaner and safer.
Oh, yeah. Okay. It doesn't matter that they can just, with a stroke on a computer, zero out your account if they decide to do so.
Okay, because of your social credit score, because you're not up on, you haven't had your shot, or you haven't had your most recent one, or you share a view that is unacceptable.
That's right, or your beliefs are unacceptable to them, just like M&T. They shut down my bank accounts, and I asked the pretty little lady that worked there, I said, well, why did you do that? She said, oh, this is just a hard close. I said, what do you mean hard close? It's a hard close. Well, I don't know what that is. Well, you may have said something in public or an article. No, I knew what that was. So they shut it down. If they don't like you, if they don't like what you believe or talk about and whatever, then they can just say, well, I don't think they need to do business at our bank. Remember, Warren Buffett runs M&T. So.
Okay, and I heard he's a knight of some sort.
No doubt.
Okay, so anyhow, you know, people say, well, Mickey, people will say, oh, you said that Mickey Mouse was a knight of Malta. Well, in a sense, he was. But Roy Disney Jr., the nephew of Walt Disney, he was a knight of St. Gregory.
Right. Roy Disney is the knight of St. Gregory. That's right.
Yes. So you could say, yes.
Brother Rupert Murdoch.
Oh, yes. So you could say that Mickey Mouse is a knight of Malta.
Could be. I think he has some cartoons with his cape on. The Caped Crusader. Uh-huh.
Okay, well, yeah, I realize we're being light and somewhat facetious, but this underlines a sort of a more serious situation where we're finally living. Well, I wish we were living in 1984. You know, if we go back 39, almost 40 years ago. But it's the world in which we now live is far worse than 1984. You could be punished for having the wrong opinion, the wrong view on any issue. You could be denied a job, you could lose your job, you could be denied a bank account, be dinged on your credit score for having the wrong view because of something you said or wrote on a platform 10 years ago, and for no apparent reason. And this is actually happening to people right now. Remember the whole Canadian trucker strike about, a year and a half ago, back in early 2022.
Yes,
there are thousands, I know you have listeners north of the border. There are thousands of people who have their bank accounts shut down because they supported the truckers. Or they made a favorable post for them on the social media. So they're basically criminalized, not because they had done anything wrong, but just because they had the wrong state of the wrong.
Now you see, if we had a government a real civilian constitutional government. The moment a bank would do that, immediately the lawyers would descend on that bank with a huge, massive lawsuit for violation of First Amendment rights. That's a First Amendment right, okay, what you believe. And you're going to violate my First Amendment right by keeping me out of a bank? I mean, they would pay millions. So if you had a real government with a real attorney general, with the real district of, what was it, DOJ, after the first two suits, that wouldn't be happening anymore. But that just shows you that this government is not punishing evil and rewarding good as the Bible mandates the purpose for government being. Romans 13, 2 Peter 2, 1 Peter 2.
Okay, and just for clarification, I was talking about Canada, so they don't, technically speaking, have a First Amendment, but I believe it's called the Charter of Rights, which is basically their version of our Constitution. So you have thousands of Canadians who have their rights violated just because they just didn't want to get this shot, or they supported people who didn't necessarily want to get the shot. And we're not talking about Red China. We're talking about Canada here.
Right, but Canada is run by a notorious communist whose father was a communist and whose father was also connected with the communists of Russia and the communists of China. So Canada is under today the absolute dictatorial rule of communism run by the Jesuits and their agent, Justin Fidel Castro.
So people ask me. So do I know who the father of the current prime minister in Canada is? Was it Fidel Castro or was it Pierre Trudeau? And the answer is yes. Okay, because
okay.
So is it really a difference?
No, Canada's been under socialist communism for years. You have anti-gun laws. I mean, those apostate Protestants up there have allowed the Jesuits to take everything from them through their capital in Ottawa. Jesuits ran their capital to the detriment of all the white Protestants in Canada. And they keep destroying them. Their rights, their culture, their history, all of it.
Okay, and of course, something we've discussed before, so forgive me for repeating myself, but I found out from several sources, speaking of Canada, starting in 2020, so this has been going on for 3 years, they've decided to import something like 500,000 people from the third world, Latin America, Africa, places like that.
Yeah, and 500,000 people of color to forcefully race mix and miscegenate the white Canadians, so to make it so that Canada is no longer a white population, so the Pope's white power structure that runs Canada won't have any serious resistance to it. Because they know the darker populations do not resist the white power structure. The greatest enemy of the Pope's white power structure are white nations. So they have to be race mixed, miscegenated out of existence. And that's why they did that in Canada. That's why they're doing the same thing here with all these alien Hispanic Roman Catholics coming in by the tens of thousands every day. Got to do away with these white people, these wicked white people.
And that's why they're doing this to several countries in Europe, as we've discussed before. I don't mean to be redundant, but there's a movie that came out earlier this year. I about looked into it that much. It was called The Little Mermaid. It's a live version of the, I guess, 1989 cartoon. Now, The Little Mermaid is a short story, as an 1837 short story by Hans Christian Andersen, who was a Danish writer. So in the story, the protagonist, Ariel, I guess she's part Danish and part mermaid. Now, I'm not going to get into the weirdness of it, but in this story and in the original cartoon, she was white. She had red hair. But inexplicably, in this updated version, Ariel, the mermaid, is black.
Of course. You can't have them wicked white people having any kind of culture, any kind of history. We got to do away with it, George. We need to join them and advocate our own destruction. Maybe we can commit suicide on TV and something, saying we hate our whiteness and we're going to be committing suicide. How about that?
Well,
That's what's happening. It's the suiciding, it's the genociding of historic white Protestant nations. And maybe some of these white women might want to wake up to that because they're participating in it and promoting it.
Okay, I'm serious. The actual term for that, when you take a historically white person or white character such as Ariel in The Little Mermaid and change it to a non-white person, specifically black, that's called artistic decolonization. That's no joke. And so, and if it were
artistic decolonization, even though we white people purchased all the land here in North America, we purchased all the land of the 13 colonies from the Indians, we purchased Arizona, California, New Mexico in the Treaty of Guadalupe for $50 million. We purchased the land of the Louisiana Purchase. We also purchased much of it from the Indians. We were very good to them before the war between the states. After the war between the states, the Jesuits used their Yankee Union hordes to essentially steal the lands from the Indians with the Treaty of Fort Laramie and others. But that wasn't done by white Protestants and Baptists. That was done by the white Roman Catholics with General Sheridan and other Roman Catholics that stole the land from the Indians after the war between the states. So that distinction is never made. So don't talk about decolonization with the original 13 states. That's more communist propaganda.
Well, actually, I was just talking. I wasn't talking about the United States per se, but the term where they take historically white characters and make them into non-white, specifically black. That's
it's funny because I have to laugh because the blacks could never produce a culture like that. Show me anywhere in the world where these blacks could ever produce a Hans Christian Andersen, Denmark culture of buildings and a wonderful culture like that. Blacks don't produce culture left to themselves. They only contribute to culture when they're living around white people that are historically Protestant and Baptist. But there isn't any place in Africa I want to live. Ain't no way. They've already destroyed South Africa, the Transvaal, the Orange Free State. They've destroyed the white areas of Africa. Rhodesia. They've destroyed it. Wherever they take over, they destroy. Like they destroy every major city in this country. They did it in Panama. I was in Panama several years ago, and the Hispanic guy took me down. He said, he spoke to me in Spanish. He said, I'll take you to the black portion. I said, okay. And he showed me. It was just a typical slum. He said, muy mal, very, very bad. That's what they do wherever they go. They don't produce culture. They ruin it if it's been created by white people or Hispanics, let's say in Panama. And they haven't ruined any Asian culture because they haven't been allowed to live in Asian nations as a community. The Asians hate them. So don't talk to me about universal equality. And you want to take my white culture from me, there's going to be a fight. And there ought to be a fight.
Okay, so I mentioned specifically Denmark. Now, for what it's worth, Denmark was never involved with the North Atlantic trade, slave trade. They never had a colony anywhere. So I'm not sure why the judges feel a need to punish them other than being historically white and Protestant.
That's the reason why. That's the reason why, George. You're destroying the white Protestant nations as we speak. Denmark, Finland. Finland wasn't in the slave trade. Sweden wasn't in the slave trade. Norway wasn't in the slave trade. They're white. They're Protestants. They're bigoted. We got to kill those people off the face of the earth. Remember that savage black mulatto out of that University of Virginia? He started talking like that. I said, who is this guy advocating genocide? You think he'll ever get prosecuted for that? Of course not.
Okay. What are your listeners? I want to say, was it Josh or Eric Rudder? I'm sorry. But the thing is, sent me a video clip recently at an event, I guess, in South Africa. I forgot his name. But the leader of the black leader of the Communist Party in South Africa now was doing a rally somewhere in South Africa, and he was using the slogan "Kill de Boer,
Oh, that filthy Mandela did that. I got videos of him. Kill the boar, singing the song, Kill the Boar. Yeah.
Well, okay. And for those who don't know,
Remember, I call him that filthy Nelson Mandela because he killed 40,000 of his own black people. That's what that savage did.
Well, actually, this is recently. You're talking the end of last month. So Nelson Mandela died.
I know that, George, but they're singing the same song, Kill the Boer.
Now, for those who don't know, the Boers are the Dutch Protestant settlers of what is now South Africa.
And remember, they settled in region. There were no blacks living there. They didn't come in and kick out the blacks. There were no blacks living there. You ask any Afrikaner, they'll tell you that.
Well, that would not be a good move if they were to kill the Boers. That would not be a good move, not only for the Boers, but for the blacks, because they themselves would end up starving because they need people who can run their country.
Just like Rhodesia, just like Zimbabwe. They killed all the whites out of Zimbabwe, and so they're starving. And so those poor little savage blacks are begging to the white nations to send us money and food. No, you can starve to death. You killed all those white people, now you can starve to death. You can get what you sow. You can reap what you sowed. That's what they're going to get here when they kill these white Protestant Mennonites and Amish and other farmers here. When these majority savage blacks start foraging out and killing them, there's not going to be anybody to make the food for them. Well, you know what they're going to go? They're going to go to cannibalism. That's what they'll do. And that's exactly what Fletcher Prouty wrote in his book, JFK. When the food is cut out, these cities are going into cannibalism. So much for high black African culture. What a joke.
Well, this is something we've discussed before, but when Protestant missionaries in centuries past, when Protestant evangelists, missionary is a Catholic term, went into places like the Pacific, Tahiti, they noticed the locals were savages. They're naked, they're tattooed, and they're eating each other.
Yeah, that's savagery.
So
just like the authors of the Declaration of Independence said, the Indian nations are savages, and they were savages. Go ahead.
Well, you notice that when the evangelist priests and many of them responded, the locals responded and received the gospel, not only did they start reading the Bible and building churches, they stopped getting tattoos, they stopped eating each other, and they put clothes on.
Yeah, they put clothes on, stopped getting tattoos. That's a message all these white people in this country getting tattooed crazily. Tattooing is a pagan, Christ-denying routine that shortens your lifespan, puts ink in your system, attacks your immune system. But that's okay because we want to do it. We want to look like everybody else now. That's all Watusi stuff. And furthermore, these white people, they got their earlobes with these big old holes in them. I remember as a boy looking at National Geographic, and there was a face of a black Watusi there, and he had these big lips with a big lip protruding out with some insert in the lower lip and then the upper lip and then the earlobes. That's all black savagery. And that's what these white people are doing all the time now. So it's black savagery among the whites. No wonder we're under national judgment.
Okay, so I was trying to make this a presentation, a semi-scholarly academic presentation, not a
You're doing a good job, George. In spite of me, you're doing a good job. Go ahead.
Well, however, I'm going to fall off my. You mind if I just fall off my high horse for a second?
Sure.
And get down in the gutter, so to speak.
Of course. Just tell the truth, George. If it's the truth, it's not in the gutter.
Okay. Well, I'm talking figuratively, so to speak. But it seems as if that now I'm 54 years old, and just using that as a perspective, something I noticed that has changed in, say, last 30, 35 years is, and I've actually heard this from various people, prior to 1990, at least in the United States, you almost never saw women get tattoos. About the only exceptions would be the so-called biker chicks, because it just wasn't considered ladylike. But since 1990 or so, all bets are off. Anybody everybody's getting tattoos. Doctors, lawyers, accountants, professionals, blue collar, white collar, everybody, men, women. And we're basically, you had to wonder what has happened to us as a country. Now, maybe I'm just being a little hyperbolic, but a major vehicle for this has been professional sports, particularly the NBA, the National Basketball Association, where you have most of your players not just have one tattoo or two, they're covered. They're walled. They look like running comic books.
Well, that's African savagery. The African tribal people always get a bunch of tattoos and a bunch of piercings. It's about popularizing African savagery culture here in America among the white people. And why not? Because most white Christians have adopted an African Bible called the NIV and the NASB with an African text out of Alexandria. So if they're going to go African and have an African Bible, maybe they need to look like Africans, and maybe all the white women need to copulate with African men and mulattoize the whole place. Just destroy it. Go ahead, George.
Okay, well, as I said, well, even growing up, I mean, you're a little bit older than I am, brother. And even men who had tattoos, there was this like unwritten rules. Like maybe like I'm not advocating tattoos by any stretch, but even those who got them, might have like you're in the Navy and you got one of your ship or your upper arm, or maybe the anchor. But it's just like it was one or two in specific spots, not completely head to toe.
That's right.
And
my grandpa Callahan, I got a tattoo on his forearm and it said love. And as I was a little boy, he loved me as almost his only son because he had only had a daughter, which was my mother. And so he treated me like I was his son. And so I used to go visit him every year, and I would go to Sacramento and we go fishing in Folsom Lake and the Sacramento River. And so I learned most of what I learned from my grandfather. And he said, Eric, whatever you do, don't ever get a tattoo. I'm sorry I got this tattoo. And I remember him telling me that specifically.
So, amen. But anyhow, but as I said, it seems as if that we're in the United States, and you can say this is true of other countries as well, but especially the United States, that we're becoming more and more pagan. We're becoming more and more wicked. And maybe that's simply my perception. Whether it's accurate, I'm not sure. But in terms of saying, in terms of what is now acceptable, that wasn't acceptable that long ago. And for example, we were talking about body art, but basically, people are running around half naked all the time. And I'm not talking about beaches. I'm just talking about at the supermarkets. And it's just what used to be considered to be common sense or common courtesy is no longer the case. What do they say? That one of the problems with common sense and common courtesy is, well, they're not very common. And it's just like when you remove
one of my past pastors said to me, Nelson Turner, he said, Eric, we're witnessing the death of polite culture. That's right. I mean, I was in the dive shop a few days ago getting oxygen for one of my tanks, and I was talking to the guy who works there. I know owns the place. I known him for years. And in comes this white guy, all disheveled, and interrupts and says, I need to have some tanks filled. Well, he's talking to me, not him. And so Mark says, I'll get you in a minute. And the guy turned around and walked out. And Mark says, see, they have no couth. I was helping you here and he just interrupted me. I said, yeah, I would have never done that. So we're witnessing the death of polite culture with any sort of manners. And one of the reasons is the lack of manhood, the lack of white manhood, degenerated into nothing but a bunch of commercial addicts that are either sissies or savages. And that's what we have. They're ungroomed, not well spoken. They don't have respect for the people they're in the midst of, because if you did, you wouldn't dress the way you do. I remember my father taught me, when you go out in public, you just don't go out with a t-shirt on. You go out looking dressed, looking well, because you have respect for the people that you're going to be around when you're out and about. I remember he taught me that. It stayed with me. But so we don't have fatherhood anymore. We don't have mentoring of young men, and I mean white men. And so as a result, we have no real manhood anymore in seeking to preserve our once great and highly advanced white Protestant and Baptist culture. And that's a tragedy. It's a terrible loss.
Okay, well, I just want to mention something that may sound completely immaterial, but I remember years ago when I was back in the 1990s, when I was going to my local community college, taking our freshman English class, and one of the books we had to use was called William Schrunk's and E.B. White's Elements of Style, which came out, the original edition came out in 1918, so over 100 years ago. And it's been updated since then because it's been more modernized. So one of the things they say, as far as I know, they're complete pagans. But one of the things they said, hey, if you want to become proficient in English, get yourself a copy of the 1611 authorized version of the Bible. You don't necessarily have to believe it or be a Christian. Just read it on a daily basis because it'll help you with your grammar and your structure. Now, and they said in the foreword of the book, Element of Style, we're grammarians. We're not theologians. People argue that these other translations are better. We don't have an opinion on that. We're just looking at the simplicity of the grammar and syntax.
Correct.
If you read from that, you'll become an excellent reader and writer.
That's right.
Whether you're talking about your daily newspaper or textbooks, whatever. So
I remember, George, I remember one of my teachers, Dr. Rembert Carter, who got his doctorate in history from Edinburgh. He said to me, Eric, he said, when they took the King James Bible, when they took the Bible out of the public schools in 1963 with the decision of the Earl Warren Supreme Court, immediately the SAT scores started to plummet. Those are facts. And that's also interesting that in the very same year that they would take the Bible out of the public schools, the very high-level Jesuit Freemasons who did that would also kill Kennedy in 63. So 63 was a watershed year for the beginning degeneration of American white Protestant culture.
Well, it's funny you should bring that up, brother, because something I've had in my hopper for a while is I want to have a discussion about the year 1968. Not now because we're almost out of time, but it's not original with me. But if you study that year, 5 years later, in 1968, the Jesuits set into motion a number of their agendas.
Well, let's talk about 67. The Jesuits set in motion their agenda of wanting to foment a war in the Middle East with the USS Liberty fiasco, which Cardinal Spellman oversaw every bit of it, and his American president, L.B. fornicating LBJ. So the very same people behind the Kennedy assassination, taking the Bible out of public schools, were behind the Liberty conspiracy to sink the Liberty, blame Egypt, and then justify an attack against Egypt and also an attack on Israel because Russia was going to launch missiles for the destruction of the Dome of the Rock and the Alaska Mosque. And you can get this in a 4-volume set titled, Destroying Liberty. It's on the USS Liberty. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead. So 68, you were saying, George?
Well, yes, we need to discuss that. We're not going to do it now, but just for example,
Sacrificing Liberty. 4 DVD, 4-volume set, Sacrificing Liberty. You listeners got to get it and you got to watch it. But go ahead.
Okay, I mean, I know you've mentioned this before in your book, Vatican Assassins. For example, 911 became the national emergency dialing code that year. Construction of the World Trade Center began in New York City, in Manhattan. But as I said, I'm going to hold off on 1968 because that probably requires at least 1 hour to discuss all the things that happened in that year.
Sure.
Now, of course, you could talk about any year, 1969, 1967, but as I said, 1968 is especially important.
Yep.
But now you made reference to the 6-Day War, 1967. There's a movie that's coming out, I believe, this month or next month, called Golda. Are you familiar with it?
I've heard of it. Yeah. I remember she was working for the Pope too.
Okay, it's supposed to
That
be
little witch, that Golda Meir wanted to give all kinds of praise to Pius XII, who oversaw the Eurasian Jewish Holocaust. And Golda Meir wants to honor him. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, so it's supposed to the film, from what I understand, is supposed to deal with the 1963 Yom Kippur War.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, the
1973. That's 73.
But as I said, I've not looked into it, so I'm really not qualified to have an opinion on it. But I'm sure the Jesuits involved with it somehow.
Of course. Absolutely. So was Alexander Haig. So was Henry Kissinger. We'll have a talk on that. We'll quote a portion out of Loftus's work, Secret War Against the Jews. He has a section on the 73 Yom Kippur War.
But there's a movie that's out right now that actually several people have asked me to talk about, or 2 or 3. It's called Barbie. Are you familiar with it?
Well, that's another one. They're Africanizing Barbie, making her a black girl. Yeah, it's another one.
Well, actually, there is. Okay, I've not seen the film, nor do I intend to, but I've seen clips of it and I read about it, and I've seen a number of reviews. Now, most of the Barbies in this film are white. There are a couple of blacks. There's a transgender, non-binary, or something. Of course.
Okay, good. You got to include those perverts. Go ahead. That's perversion. Yeah.
Okay. So I understand that in this film, it takes place in a place called Barbie Land, where is run this kingdom or is run by Barbies. And the men who are subordinate to them are called kins. They do everything the Barbies want them to do.
Well, that's kind of like most of the white women today. They want all their men to do what they tell them to do. And, if you don't do what I tell you to do, well, I won't cook for you tonight or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah,
so
feminism in this
the opening scene of the
American manhood. And so I can see it reflected in what you're talking about in Barbie. The women telling the men what to do. Great.
Okay, so, however, this is geared towards girls, like preteen girls.
Good. That means they'll be wrecked by the time they're old enough to get married. They can never stay married. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, exactly. So that is how this sort of thing works. Now, the producer of this film is a woman by the name of Gretchen Gerwig. She's 40 years old, or actually she'll be turning 40 years old tomorrow, on August the 4th, 1983. Now, she's from Sacramento, California, and she went to St. Francis High School in Sacramento.
Oh, sounds like a good Catholic girl. Go ahead.
How'd you know? So there's an opening scene in the film, or in the opening scene of the film, there's a bunch of little Barbie girls who are out in the field playing with their Barbie dolls, and they say, you know what? We don't want to play with our little Barbie dolls. So what they do is they throw them they throw their little dolls, baby dolls, and they bash their heads against rocks. And this is supposed to be an homage to
That sounds like the Jesuit oath, because they talk about bashing the babies' heads against rocks and killing the heretics. That's all in the Jesuit oath of the fourth vow. That's what the Einsack group did to the little Jewish babies when they were invaded Russia. Take them by the feet and bash their heads, swing them and bash their heads into a rock wall. The pop sounded like a gun went off. And so, no, this is just a Jesuitism 101. So Barbie is going to be a little Jesuitish. bashing the heads of their little dolls against the wall. Good. It's wonderful. And make them really good mothers.
Yes. So, so it's also supposed to be an homage to the 1968 film, was it 2001: A Space Odyssey? We're talking about that year, 1968. So we're running a little bit short on time, but something I wanted to mention is, I guess a few days ago, on Monday, Paul Rubin died. He was better known by the stage name Pee Wee Hermans. He was born Paul Rubensfeld.
Sounds
okay.
like he's Jewish to me.
How'd you know?
Working for the Jesuit order. They love their papal court Jews. Go ahead.
Yes. So, anyhow, most people have heard of Paul, are familiar with him because of his movies like Pee-wee's Big Adventures, and Pee-wee's Playhouse. And I'll try to keep this as G-rated as possible. But back in 1981, he was arrested at an adult cinema in Sarasota, Florida, for pleasuring himself. I'll just leave it at that. And turns out this was not his first arrest. About 10 years earlier, he was arrested for loitering in front of basically what they call the adult bookstore.
The adult bookstore. Let's call it what it is. Let's call it a sex pervert fornicating bookstore. An adult bookstore could be a bookstore for high-level study of medicine or the arts or law. That would be an adult bookstore. Why do they take the word adult and make it for fornication and illicit copulation?
Indeed. So then, I guess about 20 years ago, he was arrested for being possession of childhood pornography.
Great. You think all this pedophilia has anything to do with child pornography?
Well,
yeah, I think so. That's why it ought to be a capital offense. Anybody caught making child pornography, that's an immediate death penalty. That's how you get rid of it.
Oh, well,
evil.
Well, you wouldn't get an argument from me. So back in the 1970s, a young Rubensfeld joined a comedy troupe in L.A. Where he befriended Philip Edward Hartman, who was born, who lived from the 24th of September 1948 to May the 28th, 1998. So he was 49 years old when he died, Phil Hartman. He apparently was murdered. Hartman was murdered by his wife, and then she allegedly committed suicide thereafter. I suppose that's the official story. But anyhow, so Hartman was Canadian, and he was of German Catholic background.
Mm-hmm. So he was working with Pee Wee Herman.
Yes.
Right, and their perversions.
Yes. So something
crime, it ought to be a crime, and they should have all been prosecuted. There has to be fear to do evil and a desire to do good, because government's to punish evil and reward good.
Okay, well,
you can't have a culture and a growing population and growing advancements in the arts and sciences and the preaching of the Word of God and lexicons and dictionaries. You can't have an advancing scientific intellectual nation when you're not punishing evil. Sin dumbs people down, makes them stupid. And so they should be punishing it, but they're not. But they will in my new country. My new country that we're going to start here and somewhere in Pennsylvania or somewhere here in North America, Probaptical, we will punish that.
Well, amen. As they did historically. I mean, up until as recently as the 1990s, New Mexico had anti-fornication laws. Now on the books.
So did India. I believe if you committed adultery in India, they sent you to jail for 6 months. There wouldn't be a whole lot of people walking around the streets in this country. The jails would be full.
Well,
You got to punish that kind of behavior because it destroys the family, which is the basic nuclear core for any country. You have to punish anything that destroys the family.
Well, amen. Well, see, as I said, in as recently as the 1990s, the state of New Mexico had anti-fornication laws. You could actually go to jail if you're arrested for having sex outside of marriage. No, they had separate laws. They used to have separate laws for adultery. Just for clarification.
And this was in New Mexico?
Correct.
It sounds to me, George, like those highly moral American Indians would be the ones who would be behind that kind of law. Wouldn't you say, George? Couldn't be any white people that believe the Bible. It had to be those virtuous, peace-loving Indians, the Apache, the Comanche, and they must have been behind getting that law passed. Wouldn't you say, George?
Probably. No.
That law is an outworking of white Protestant Bible reading and Baptist Bible reading people. Period.
Yes. Now, for what it's worth, as corrupt as our military is, that used to be in any branch of the service, you could actually theoretically be court-martialed if you committed adultery.
That's right.
Yeah. However,
that's if you survived it and the husband didn't come after you with a couple of his friends and kill you. Is that what happened? They just disappear.
But I'd imagine those laws have long since been taken off the books. Now, there are still some laws in the books in California as recently as the 21st century, which made, homosexuality was officially illegal in California until the 1970s.
Homosexuality, sodomy destroys the family unit. Therefore, it must be punished as a crime.
But there's been a concerted effort in recent years to change the laws in California to where homosexuality is no longer not a crime, but being convicted of underage sex, that's now becoming decriminalized. It's just like there are all sorts of laws saying in California that are still on the books saying that people are, say, under a certain age, like 14 or 12, they can still be punished. But now they want to get rid of all laws, any sort of vestiges of decency that we had in this state.
Yep, that's right. Well, they're just preparing it for the Sino-Soviet Muslim invasion. Chinese aren't doing that. The Chinese aren't race mixing either. Chinese don't marry Japanese. Japanese don't marry Vietnamese. Vietnamese don't marry Koreans. There is no race mixing in Asian nations. Only here for these horrible, terrible white people, because that's the solution to our problem. Just race mix all the whites up.
Or either miscegenate them or just have them not reproduce.
Yeah, have them not reproduce, yeah. Of course, that's quite a few of these white women, they don't want to have any children. It's amazing, George, but the judgment of God is upon us, and I fear for what he is going to do to this country in the throwing off of his restraints and the refusal to have the Bible in the public schools that were founded so that the children knew how to read the Bible. Without that, there would be no public schools. There weren't public schools in the Pope's dark ages. Public schools are a result of the Protestant Reformation, namely the Puritans set it up. But we've departed from that. The Puritans are wicked, terrible people. The white people are wicked and terrible. The Bible's wicked and terrible. We're going to throw off all the restraints. We're going to one great big fornicative, murderous, adulterous, sorcery people. And God's going to send a huge military host to kill us. Because he's not putting up with it.
Okay, can I just make one last point before we sign off, brother?
Sure, George.
Well, it seems that for the most part, we're not reading anything. We Americans, by and large, are not reading the Bible. We're not reading the 1611 Bible, and we're not reading these junk Bibles like the NIV or whatever happens to be popular these days. Yep. We're not, And for the most part, people who are reading is fluff and puff. It's
Right.
trivia.
They do not believe. No. Yeah.
So we're basically heading into a dark age. There's I'm not sure who said this, but somebody said a man who reads and chooses not to is no better than a man who cannot read. We're becoming a completely illiterate and illiterate country.
That's right. And Jefferson said, anybody who can't read can't have a free country, can't have a free government. And he was right.
And if I could just mention something, well, as this is an addendum to my last point, I remember when I was at my community college back in the 1990s, this is before I took that English class, I was taking a introductory U.S. history course, and the instructor asked the class some questions. And he said, how many of you are taking this class because you have to? And most of you people in the class said yes. Okay, how many, if you had your druthers, would you not take this class? Now, granted, most of the stuff we learned in there was useless anyhow, but that's besides the point. And he said, if you had your druthers, would you not take any history classes whatsoever? With a few exceptions, all the people said yes, because people just don't like studying history. And
because they've made it so irrelevant. I hated history because it was irrelevant. It meant nothing. If you taught true history, man, you'd be on the edge of your seat, and you couldn't wait to get back to class the next day.
Okay, well, I wish I had heard of you like 30 plus years ago. That would have been different. I wish people had heard of you 30, 40 years ago. I'm not trying to deify you, Brother Eric, but it's just that the way they teach history, at least in the United States, is horrible. I can understand why people don't like it. It's boring. It's just nothing but rote memorization, fact, trivia that has, and you almost never learn the context.
No.
However,
because if you're not taught the Reformation
versus
Counter-Reformation, if you're not taught the Reformation versus Counter-Reformation for the last 500 years, all history is nebulous and irrelevant and is not going anywhere. Has no form or function. But you can't talk evil about the Catholic Church, otherwise you're going to be a bigot. And so we can't learn the true history of the papacy. And without that true history, then we don't understand the rise of Western civilization. That's right.
Well,
that's why we need a new country, George. We need a new country because this one's finished.
Well, amen. Well, see, the thing is,
we're not going into the new right, and we're not joining Donald Trump or that other guy in Florida. What's his name? Another Roman Catholic. So no, we're not joining that. We're going to have our own new white Protestant and Baptist nation somewhere in North America, and we're not going to join the new right fascist movement that's coming. Not joining.
Oh yes. So you're not talking about Ron DeSantis, who's a member of?
That's him. Yeah.
Who basically sacrificed his own sister to get into office.
Wonderful.
So no,
I think a good Catholic.
No, I mean his sister Christina died of cancer at the age of 30.
Terrible. And when you understand the real cause of cancer, you're never going to get it. Well, you get rid of your parasites, you get rid of Candida fungus, you're not going to get cancer.
So
I teach it on my
I was thinking, I don't. Okay, well, I just want to make a clarification. I don't want anybody accuse me of slandering Governor DeSantis, but he may not have made that decision. His handler said, you know what, we need to give it, in order for you to become governor of Florida, it's going to cost you something. And just like, hey, if you want to be a rock star and get this record deal, we need something from you.
That happens more often than we would care to know.
And so they said, hey, Christina, she's a pretty girl. Well, it's unfortunate. And she's only 30 years old. Oh, well.
It's called the act of redemption. They can die to save your life. And what's his name? Stanley Kubrick illustrated that act of redemption in Eyes Wide Shut. And that's done more often than what you would want to know.
Indeed. So perhaps we can pick this conversation next week.
Sure. Sure, okay. My brother. Well, then you have a wonderful weekend, and I will begin to sign off, but don't get off yet because something happens and I make a mistake. So, well, so any last words, George? Any last contact information you'd like to give to the listeners?
Well, yes, I'm innocent. You can't prove a thing. I was in Chicago. Oh, I'm sorry, wrong. I'm sorry. So if people have any questions, comments, or concerns, critiques, please send me a line at georgewidger1969@gmail.com, GEORWID1969@gmail.com. If people didn't get that, they can get it from you, brother. And perhaps we'll be on. Hopefully, we will be on next week, perhaps Monday.
Yep, hopefully we'll be on Monday, George. We'll have another broadcast. So, all right, Brother George Widger, thank you for being with us today. This is Brother Eric John Phillips, 24/7 World Radio. And we just finished our broadcast today on a host of different topics. I trust you enjoyed it. Go to my website, VaticanAssassins.org, and purchase my ebook, Vatican Assassins, and also 24/7 World Radio. You can go and purchase my previous broadcasts and other things. Lastly, appreciate your prayers for 2 minutes a day, that the Lord would bring us through this transitionary period with new supporters, and we can have a new radio host and get back to what we used to do. So, in the meantime, appreciate your prayers. Lord bless, and we'll be back next week. Until then, Maranatha. The Lord be with you.